Welcome. Please type in the chat where you're joining from today, how many people are watching with you, and if you are able, the native land which you occupy. If you don't know the answer to that last part, you can check on native-land.ca. So if you're just joining us again, please check in, welcome, type in the chat where you're joining from today, including if you know the native land which you occupy, and how many people are watching with you. Wonderful. I'm seeing some voices come in the room. Liz is here from Westchester, just her. Timothy from Orlando in Seminole Territory. Samuel, 350. Thanks, Samuel. Glad to see you here. All right, we got some more voices. Elizabeth in Naperville, Council of the Three Fires. Thanks, Elizabeth. George in Chicago. Glad you're here, George. Keep on checking in, guys. I think it's so fun to have your voices fill this room. This virtual room. Alette from Oswego, Alan from South Shore in Chicago. Thanks for being here, Alan. Great, let's have you guys keep checking in. Great, Samuel's also from Chicago. Thanks, Samuel. All right, keep checking in, and I'm gonna move us forward as more folks fill this room with us. I'm Anna Garcia Doyle. I'm the Executive Director of One Earth Collective, which produces the One Earth Film Festival. Welcome to this festival screening event. We hope it will provide us all with rich opportunities for learning, a brave and safe space for important conversations, and a way to move from inspiration to action. We could not do this work without the support of our sponsors and partners. So thank you to WBEZ Chicago and Vocalo, First United Church of Oak Park, Good Heart Work Smart Foundation. Also, if your circumstances allow, please donate to support One Earth's nonprofit year-round screening events, youth programs, and more at oneearthfilmfest.org. We gratefully welcome you to One Earth's 11th festival season, and we invite you to join us in turning the tide on our climate crisis. The festival uses the power of film to create a sea change on topics of environment and those intersected with environment, like racial, social, and economic justice. This year, we've adapted a hybrid format where all screenings are virtual, with some accompanying in-person events taking place in the Chicago area. Whether live or virtual, we remain committed to our unique model of gathering and community to raise awareness of the issues, engage in dialogue, and be inspired to act. A powerful image and call to collective action in light of this year's festival theme, Turn the Tide, are the words of Japanese writer Ryanosuke Satoru. Individually, we are one drop. Together, we are an ocean. Our event will take place in 4 parts. Soon, we'll introduce you to some folks who will help us have a rich discussion after the film. Then, we'll watch the film together. After the film, we'll unpack its themes in a facilitated dialogue with our panelists. Please use the chat to share your thoughts, ideas, or questions. We'll end by sharing concrete actions you can take to be part of the solution. These suggested actions come from our panelists and action partners. I'd now like to make a few brief acknowledgements. The first is that as we reframe narratives around justice, environment, and equitable solutions to our climate crisis, we acknowledge the many filmmakers, film subjects, facilitators, and panelists joining this and other fest events. Thank you. Your wisdom and experiences help us spark and sustain actions for the protection of our One Earth and for the just treatment of its resources and its people. The second acknowledgement is that One Earth Collective is based in Chicago, the traditional homelands of the Council of the Three Fires, the Odawa, Ojibwe, and Potawatomi nations, and home to many other tribes, including today, peoples from over 100 tribal nations. Despite this, there are currently no federally recognized tribes in Illinois, due in part to colonization, relocation, and genocide. One Earth sustains its commitment to presenting films that center Indigenous stories and voices. We believe that beyond acknowledging the native lands we each occupy, we must lift up Indigenous voices and support the work of First Nations groups. If you're in the Chicago area, please support the important work being done by the American Indian Center Chicago, the Chicago American Indian Community Collaborative, Chi Nations Youth Council, and others, and watch for the Field Museum exhibition Native Truths, Our Voices, Our Stories, co-curated with collaborators from more than 100 tribes, opening this May. A third acknowledgement is that shared agreements can help keep our conversations safe and respectful. Please observe the following agreements when participating. Put aside your preconceptions, acknowledge your privilege, internalize what you've learned, approach the conversation with respect, engage your active listening, use I statements, and get comfortable with your own story. One last thing before we meet our facilitator and program participants. If you're active on social media, tell people that this is happening. Amplify these voices and be a part of the community we're building here together. The hashtags for the festival are hashtag OEFF 2022 and hashtag Turn the Tide. And now I'd like to turn it over to our facilitator to introduce themselves, the panelists, and our film.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Anna. Hello, everyone. My name is Krishna Mandev, and I'm going to be your facilitator for tonight. I'm a One Earth Youth Advisory Council member and a senior at Lebanon Trail High School in Frisco, Texas. I myself am an amateur filmmaker and previously submitted environmental films as part of the One Earth Film Festival Youth Filmmakers Contest. I actively participate in the climate movement and am a member of the Climate Reality DFW chapter here in my community. But enough about me. I want to talk a little bit about the One Earth Film Festival model. We often watch movies and then walk out of the theater without really reflecting on what we've seen, how we feel about it, or what implications it has for our lives. Today, we plan to have a rich, thought-provoking dialogue sparked by Youth Unstoppable and joined by knowledgeable, committed panelists. We look forward to having you participate, enriching the dialogue with your reflections and questions in the chat, and exploring ways to take related action. Now, I'd like to briefly introduce the panelists we have tonight. First, we have Abrar Anwar, who is the film subject of Youth Unstoppable. We have Deja Paolo, who is a member of the Sunrise Movement in Chicago, and we'll learn a little bit more about them after the film. And now it is my pleasure to bring up director Slater Jewell-Kemper to introduce her film, Youth Unstoppable.
Thank you so much, Krishna, and everyone watching. My name is Slater, and I am a filmmaker and climate activist. I first started making this film when I was 15 years old, and it came out of a desire to capture the stories of young people who were not being listened to, who were not actively having a say in their own lives. And it was important to me to not only capture the stories of young people as they were traversing the overwhelming and difficult and complex world of climate change, but to see how other young people my age were feeling. And so I hope that this opens your heart and allows you to approach the subject of climate change from a much more human perspective.
Thank you so much, Slater. Now let's enjoy the film. See you all afterwards for a rich post-film discussion. Hello, everyone. I really hope you enjoyed that film. It was so amazing, so inspiring, so powerful. And I'd like to hear from all the audiences. What are some of the scenes, people, or even lines in the film that really stood out to you? Feel free to respond in the chat. I'd love to hear some of your comments. Definitely, Timothy. She's a faithful steward to our movement. Yeah, feel free to just drop your comments in the chat. I'd love to hear anything that stood out to you from the film, any first reactions you have after watching it, anything you feel that really stuck out to you. Oh, definitely agree, Jen. There was a lot of emotional up and down, and I'm sure Sarah would agree that It's a marathon to make that film. So. Oh, definitely her alongside Greta. That was a very powerful image. Oh yes, definitely agree, Samuel. When she visited those countries, I know oftentimes it's harder for us to get an inside look into those. So it was great that we could see what she saw over there and what millions of people are experiencing every day. Definitely agree, Alan. We have to combine the voices of all these youth and activists around the world and the power that we have. You know, like they mentioned at the beginning of the film, we all have to put our feet down. Definitely, Jennifer. There was very powerful tenacity you could feel. I agree, Anna. That scene when they were forced onto that bus, there was a palpable tension you could feel, and just the overall stress and emotions of culminating climate movement is very powerful. Definitely agree, Julie. Those scenes showing the Native Americans were very powerful, especially when she described, her own experiences in hunting and fishing on that land and having future generations with the same opportunity. It was very powerful. I agree. I definitely agree, Cousin Maria. Those the scenes of the tar sands, like she mentioned, it was just a massive scale, and trying to take that all in and see the kind of devastation that was on the lands. It was very powerful to see. Okay, thank you everyone for sharing your comments. I'd love to hear, any other comments you have or questions that we'll soon have for the panelists. And now I'd like to just bring our panelists back and give you a little more, history about them. First, I'd like to start off with Slater Jewell-Kemker, obviously from the film. So she is a filmmaker and a climate activist who has spent 12 years following the rise of the global climate movement, culminating in her film Youth Unstoppable. She lives in a self-built tiny house on wheels on her farm in Canada, as we kind of saw at the end of the film. Next, I'd like to introduce Abrar Anwar. He is one of the film subjects in Youth Unstoppable, and he's a programmer and technology consultant who is trying to utilize the microcontroller revolution to create sustainable environmental technology in Bangladesh. And finally, I'd like to introduce our final panelist, Deja Paolo. She's an organizer with the Sunrise Movement, fighting for a Green New Deal rooted in equity, protecting indigenous, black and brown, low-income, and frontline communities that have historically been at the forefront of environmental injustice in this country. She was the lead organizer for the Midwest and currently leads structure work, supporting a team that's designing future structures for the movement. So I'd like to just get some initial reactions and reflections from each of our panelists. So Slater, I'd just like to hear your first thoughts about, obviously you made the film, so you know exactly what has happened. But I'd like to hear your first thoughts on, the film now that the audience has seen it, and what are your first reflections that come to mind?
Thank you so much. I mean, it's always a little bit overwhelming in a good way, just knowing that so many people within the film industry make films and they never get to be seen. And I just feel so grateful and honored that mine does get to be seen, because these stories and these stories of young people, particularly in this time now, I think are needed more than ever. We can see that, as things get bad, people tend to isolate and to separate, and we need to be coming together more than we ever have. We need to be rethinking what it means to be human. And I think, and I hope that this film allows people to enter the conversation in a very different way. I'm also just a bit emotional right now. It's the third anniversary of the death of two of my friends who are in the in loving memory of Card. There was a plane that crashed on its way to a UN conference in Ethiopia, and Max and Micah were on that plane. I was supposed to be, but ended up filming the climate strikers in New York. So it's always a bit emotional on this day, and even more so just showing the film and reliving a lot of the things that we went through together.
Thank you, Slater. And it's very sad to hear that they couldn't be, with us as part of this movement continuing on. But there's so many emotions that we're all feeling right after this film. So we're honored to have you here and very inspired to be able to play your film. Abrar, I'd like to hear from you as well. Any first thoughts you have for the audiences after we've all watched this film?
Well, watching the film has always been a crazy experience for me, especially the parts that I haven't been in, and seeing the struggle and growth of the youth climate movement and the climate movement in general, and how Slater has not only, I think, captured the front lines of climate change, but has very really captured the voices of the people who have been fighting against the system, who've been trying to raise their voices. And she's effectively wrapped up this giant journey in an amazing and emotional package. And it's an amazing experience looking at it, because I've also had an inside perspective seeing Slater work, which is incredible. And I've seen some of the people she's inspired within this movement and spoken to them, and I've actually seen a result of that even in my own country. So yeah, it's always a humbling and amazing experience watching this film.
Thank you, Abrar. I definitely agree. It's so many emotions, so many events packed into one film. It's a lot to handle, but we'll be breaking it down a little bit. And Dejah, I'd love to hear your initial thoughts as a fellow activist as well after watching this film.
Yes, definitely. And can folks hear me? All right, great. Definitely feeling a lot of emotions, and I think the thing that I'm thinking most about is, can you all hear me? Great. The thing that I'm thinking most about is the passing the baton metaphor, and I'm feeling a lot of the work that Slater, Abrar have done before me of getting us to the moment that we are now. And I'm feeling a lot of the work ahead, honestly. And I think the thing that I'm most thinking about is what do we need to know now that we didn't then about what it's going to take to actually stop the global climate crisis. And I feel like that's something that I'm really reflecting on. Oh yeah, what do we need to know? Young people like me, all of us, we're all young in our ways. What do we need to know now to actually stop the climate crisis?
I definitely agree, Dejah. There's so many emotions to unpack here, and kind of like you said, as we're passing the baton forward on to the young people, hopefully we get to a point where we no longer have to pass the baton anymore, and eventually we get to a point where the climate crisis is no longer a crisis. So thank you. Now I'd like to kick off the panel with one question. So the documentary has obviously been a 10-year journey for you. Were there any times in this journey that you lost motivation or felt like giving up or experienced any other major challenges? Because obviously we saw a few of the challenges, very large challenges and obstacles that you had to overcome. I'd like to hear about any times where you felt like giving up and what you held on to keep going.
Thank you for asking this question. I think something that has been happening more and more in the past couple of years is that I think young people in the movement and activists within the space are more and more willing and comfortable with being vulnerable about the fact that this is hard and it's okay to feel overwhelmed and to feel emotions and to not be this superhero robot who's going to push yourself to the brink and save the world. When I was first coming up within this, I did just that. And I look back at it now, I was just reflecting on the fact that like I so many times would push myself to the edge or push myself to the limit of what was actually healthy because I felt like anything that I was doing was not enough because I kept putting it on to myself that like I there was no time to be a person and to, you know, grapple with the fact that there is not just one dark night of the soul. There are many because we are human beings and we're emotional creatures. But I think where in the past it wasn't necessarily encouraged to talk about it, I think we're at this place where it actually is being viewed as a strength, this ability to be vulnerable and to connect on this level, because I do truly believe that this is how we change the ways that we communicate with each other, and this is how we change the way that we engage with each other, because I think it's easy sometimes to forget that this is bigger than just carbon. This is bigger than just numbers on a page. This is an existential crisis of what kind of person do you want to be? What kind of world do you want to live in? And not just in a like a hippie way of like, oh yeah, wouldn't that be great? But like, we need to have these conversations if we're going to survive as a species, if we're going to live in a world that, you know, is not completely destroyed by greed. These are very hard conversations, but they can also be incredibly inspiring conversations. And so I think over the years, when there have been these moments of despair and difficulty and scraping yourself off the floor, not only for me, but for almost everyone I know within the movement, what has brought us together time and time again and allowed us to keep moving forward is community, and is the remembering that we're all in this together. And it's a really beautiful thing. And I think about it a lot. It's the reason why I live the way that I live now. I live on a farm in a tiny house, and there are a couple of other tiny houses on the farm where my friends are living. And we're all really thinking about what it means to be living, what it means to be within community, and to be talking to the people around us who aren't necessarily having these conversations, and how we reach out to them. So I think, again, rambling, but this is one of the biggest things is remembering that we are emotional creatures, and that this is hard because we've never had to have these conversations before in such a real and immediate way.
Definitely, Slater. I mean, it's that shared human experience that we all wish we could tap into and make it less of a us versus them and a we, you know, united front that we could provide in this climate struggle. The next question I have, I wanted to direct it to you, Dejah. So at the end of the film, we touched a little bit on how the COVID-19 pandemic has affected youth climate strikes and global warming as a whole. So I know the pandemic has definitely impacted, you know, youth climate strikes and other in-person actions. But do you think we could get that momentum back?
Yes, not gonna lie, it's been hard organizing in a pandemic. Like the work of movement building is like it has to happen face to face in person, talking to people, doing actions. I think the questions like we have to like we have to build the momentum, you know, and so how are we gonna do it? I know Sunrise is in the process of figuring out like how do we rebuild and rebrand and re-strategize given all of the learnings around the Build Back Better legislation happening. And so, yeah, I think COVID has made it incredibly difficult to organize, to take action, and to take to the streets. I think the question is like, how are we as people, as movements, gonna like adapt? And done a lot of that. We do really cool online things. I've like never been on more fun Zoom calls than during the pandemic. And I think we also have to figure out how we get to a place where we've done this too in Sunrise, like meet in person and organize and take to the streets, because we have to build the momentum. And so
Definitely, Deja. And it's refreshing to hear that that momentum is continuing to go and you guys are adapting to this changing world. So thank you for that. Now, Abrar, I wanted to direct a question to you. What were some of your favorite experiences in, you know, this whole entire 10-year journey that you were part of, and maybe some of your favorite experiences that you had with Slater?
Well, I think one of my most favorite experiences throughout this whole thing was the Nepal trip, because Japan and then subsequently taking climate action back in my own country, it was always more of a conversation. We were always talking, but when I met Slater in Nepal and I got to go around with her and see the effects of climate change on a country that almost borders my own. It's literally right there. It really opened my eyes up because there's so much human suffering that we really don't see every day. It's blanketed by media and our daily lives and the urban growth of our society. And to really be able to get out there in nature. And there's one of the scenes in the movie where you see Slater carrying a camera and walking across this little row of soil. And I was with her when she did that, and that camera is incredibly heavy. And that was something that's incredibly difficult to do, let me tell you that. And she managed to get this incredible shot, keeping the camera still while walking across that. And it was incredibly hot at the time. Both Slater and Wendy were dehydrated, had been walking for hours, and just that she was able to push herself enough to do that inspired me a lot more than a lot of the larger parts of the film, let's say. So yeah, that was definitely, I am sorry. My cat requires attention.
Yeah,
Thank
no
you.
worries.
My cat to do the same thing, so don't worry.
And then there was, when we met back in the States for Trump, there was a radical shift in the way the world viewed climate change, the world viewed environmental policies, and a lot had changed from when we had started doing this documentary to when we met back in America. The action that I saw there, the way people raised their voices against Trump, Scott Pruitt, all of the crazy business that was happening there at the time. It was possibly one of the largest actions that I'd been to with Slater. So really being able to be a part of that and being able to see the global youth climate movement and what it had become, that was an amazing and humbling experience. And it actually, when I took that trip, it kicked off an organization here started by a friend of mine, which I later came back and joined, called Lal Shabuj. And now we have around 400 people organized in city cleanups and removing plastic from rivers and streets and dealing with the problems of a rapidly growing urban Bangladesh. So that trip really kicked off a whole different scheme of things for me. So yeah, those I think were my favorite parts of the documentary.
Thank you, Abrar. And it's great to hear that other organizations coming up in your country and things are improving. But a follow-up question to that, how are the people in Bangladesh feeling, and where do you see hope, and where do you wish to see hope?
Well, speaking for the people here, it's funny because watching this film has made me realize how much has changed environmentally speaking, even here, since we started doing this, since Slater started talking to me about this. Because back then, our biggest concern was the fossil fuel industry, rising water levels, and floods that were hitting us constantly. But a lot's changed since then. And with urban development rapidly growing cityscapes, we're starting to come up with a lot more problems. Plastic being one, water pollution, sanitation being the other. And we're starting to join the developing world in our share of pollution with industries, power plants, factories, and everything popping up here. So while the pandemic has kind of quieted down action here and really put a dampener on the voices of people in Bangladesh, pre-pandemic, there was a lot of hope that proper climate legislation would happen. And there was even an Environmental Lawyers Association formed here in Bangladesh that is looking to actually set proper sustainable environmental goals for our country, which is a far cry from when we were in Japan and the environmental minister from Bangladesh couldn't attend because he was in jail. So we have a lot of hope.
I forgot.
Yeah, I forgot too. It popped up while I was watching the film. But we definitely have a lot of hope going forward over here. And the pandemic has actually done a bit of good for us environmentally. We've actually seen a lot cleaner air, less traffic, and overall, we've had improvements in wildlife, tigers coming back because tourists haven't been moving around. So, yeah, there's a lot to fight for, and we hope you guys will join us and help us fight against all of the injustices that are happening here in terms of coal-based power plants being made by Japan and India, and the rising industries that are currently messing up our country.
Yeah, thank you for sharing, Abrar. It's definitely great to hear that there's more hope and improvements, if not for a few setbacks like you mentioned. But thank you. The next, I want to direct a question towards Dejah. How can today's youth go about advocating for climate change issues?
Yes, I think about this every day. And I hope I don't let people down with the answer, but I think it goes beyond the Twitter, the rallies, the marches, the events. Like, I think if there's something that I'm reflecting on, it's like what makes people in power move, and it's having power or leverage to move them. And I'm in a social movement. We think our power comes from organized people. We do that through like people power, political power, electing people in offices. And I think the best way that young people can go about doing the work, it's like a project, honestly, of the next decade, probably the rest of my life, honestly, is to like join organizations, institutions, like movements who have a strategy that is about bringing people together and like wielding that people power towards, institutional change, policy change. And so, yeah, join a movement. There'll probably be ways to talk more about Sunrise, but there are also a ton of other movements, organizations across the world, in the United States, in different states across the country, who like have plans to build people power, build social movements. And so I think, yeah, I want to push young people to move beyond Twitter, move beyond like taking the streets. Like, yeah, it's going to take organizing and bringing in your family and your friends to the fight. So, yeah. And also Slater, Abrar, or even Krishna, if you have ideas as well, would love to hear.
Yes. So I definitely agree with your sentiments too. That the political and strategic aspect of it, I'm sure, is overlooked in some aspects. And then obviously we don't want to underestimate the power we have in numbers, the people power. So thank you for sharing that. Next, I wanted to ask Slater, obviously it was clear in the film that you picked up not only amazing sense of confidence and skills when it comes to advocacy, but also some incredible filmmaking skills. So how are you able to balance being such an active participant in this movement while also needing to juggle the very technical aspects of making this film?
Well, for me, I initially kind of viewed this as a film school, because I spent so much of my time working on this documentary, and not only making this, but finding mentors and finding teachers and friends within the film industry who were instrumental in me growing as a storyteller. Even now, I mean, there's a part of me that almost wonders if I can even say that I'm a climate activist, because I've always been a storyteller and a filmmaker. And the reason that I started doing these kinds of things was because I felt like this story needed to be told. And so for me, it wasn't so much juggling the technical aspects as looking at it as a way to learn how to make movies and to hone the skill that for me was how I could contribute to changing the world around me. Because stories are how we learn about the world around us from a young age. It's how we learn about who we are, but also, the world that we live in. And I think so much of the way that we live could change, and the way that we move forward could change if we changed the kinds of stories that we not only told each other, but told ourselves about what is possible and about who we are and about how we can make this into an incredible opportunity of living in a world where, caring about people and rethinking our relationships to the planet and each other is exciting and new, and we get to recreate the way that we live. It doesn't have to be this doom and gloom situation where we're fighting. It can be this opportunity to actually adapt in a way that is ethical and just and sustainable. And so, yeah, I think, we all have different roles within this movement. We all have something to bring to this transition in society. And for me, it's storytelling. For me, it's filmmaking. For other people, it's organizing, or it's rallying their communities, or going to the UN, or becoming an environmental lawyer. We need to normalize this. This needs to not just be something that some people do, but that is a part of everyone's lives, because we all live on this planet, and we all live in there. There's no way. We've learned this the hard way, that there's no way. And so really, yeah, we got to get our act together.
Definitely, yeah, and I think a big part of what you mentioned, storytelling being such a large part of the climate movement, I definitely agree, because in order to persuade all these politicians and other activists to get involved, it involves like telling the best story we can. So I agree.
Well, also, just if I may, on that note, I think for so long, the story of the climate movement and the story of climate change has been one that is not accessible to a lot of people, whether it's from the majority of activists in my time being from very privileged communities. There's been various different roadblocks that have been in the way. And I think, we changed the story of climate change to one that is one of empowerment for everyone. And that's what needs to happen.
Definitely. The next question I have is directed to all of you, so feel free, each one of you, to chime in on what your thoughts are. But as we saw in the film, youth activists pretty much at every step of these COP negotiations and different climate strikes, they were being pushed out, and their voices were being silenced. So all of you were youth activists. So what would you tell young people now who face similar opposition?
I was looking at you, Dejah. I mean, I want to hear what you have to say, but
this is such a great question, and I think it gets, and I'll share, and I want to talk from your perspective, having been at COPs. But I think the thing I reflect on is like, who are the people in the way of massive, like global and federal climate legislation in the U.S. And I'm like, the most of the time, it's like not it's like not the people at COP. It's like the fossil fuel executives. It's like the, Joe Manchins that are like benefiting from fossil fuel extraction in West Virginia. And it's like, how do we actually target them and shame them, honestly, and like push and pressure them? Because they are the people that are influencing and giving money to decision makers. And so I think I'm like, we can protest and we can voice, but if we are not actually targeting the people who have the power to stop the crisis, we will never stop the crisis. And so I think for me, it's like, how do we get more serious? Like Sunrise has wide awake actions where we're like outside of Mitch McConnell's house, and it's been a little problematic, but I don't care. You shouldn't get to sleep if I don't get a shot at a like livable world in 20 years. And so how are we actually meeting the people who have the power to stop this and like making their lives hell in a lot of ways? I think that's something that's coming up for me.
I think like being a youth activist, one of the biggest challenges people face is like access, because everyone's trying to cut you off. Nobody wants to let you speak to the people in a position to do something about it. And I've found that growing up has, especially in my own country, made this easier for me, where I can actually now, I'm at a place where I'm able to go talk to people or talk to relevant ministry officials and get my message out. Before, as a youth activist, there were closed doors everywhere, and you have to get used to the constant rejection of not having that access, of being told no. And what I would say is, stand outside, scream, use a megaphone, block their streets, make it uncomfortable for them, because they're not going to hear you any other way. And this hasn't changed in the last 10 or 15 years. This isn't going to change in the next 10 years. People in power are very hard to get to. You make it inconvenient for them and you make it almost impossible for them to ignore you. So if you're a youth activist and you're looking to get out there, I think that would be one way to do it. Don't take no for an answer. Keep going. And eventually, if there's enough of you, we've seen that your voice will be heard. And, it does make a difference.
I think to add to that, from my perspective, I think young activists now need to particularly remember that it didn't just come out of nowhere, this movement, that there are people who have been on the front lines and dedicating their lives to this for decades. And, we may not have succeeded, but we also can tell you what worked and what didn't, and that we don't have to start over the movement every time there's a new organization, that we can work together and let each other know the most effective and strategic way to move forward. So I would find mentors, I would find people who either were part of the movement or are working in various other roles at the moment. We're out there and we want to talk to you and we want to work with you. We need to remember that this isn't just the youth climate movement anymore. It can be intergenerational, and we can all support each other as we move forward. I think that's something that I just want to so emphasize to young people, is that it can seem like you're fighting so often just to be heard. Why would you go out and find people who are seemingly in your way or like just blocking off an entire generation? But like, really, we don't have enough time. We need to be working together and finding ways to move forward in the fastest way possible.
Yes, wholeheartedly agree. I'll add one more thing also to what Abrar was saying around the like not listening to young people. Maybe y'all have seen the Sunrise video where there were like kids in Dianne Feinstein's office. She was like, who are you to tell me? And I think reflections on some of the stuff that I've learned with Sunrise is that it's like for us, the power goes beyond the like video. It's great. We're going to primary you and people will be terrified of getting primaried. And so we've seen some of our power come from like having elected officials and senators and Congress people be like, we want our seat and we want to champion the Green New Deal. How do we work with you? And so I think I saw there was a question around like, well, beyond the shame, like what does it mean to build power? And I think that's one of them. You know, these people move from like organized money or the power that they get in their position. And if you can threaten either of those things, you can use it to your advantage to push the sort of legislation and policy that we want to see happen to address the climate crisis.
Yeah, thank you all for sharing. I wholeheartedly agree with those sentiments. And I can speak from, some of my own experience, obviously not as storied as all of you, but it is kind of a war of attrition and it involves applying the right pressure to the right people. So another question I had for all of you, and, this is the final question I had, is, what are some of, like a few actions that, regular people or just people watching this, panel right now, what are some actions they can take to be part of the solution?
I would say, I feel like something that everyone has been talking about is definitely the people in power need to actually reflect the times that we live in and reflect the growing majority of their population in that climate needs to be a top priority. We can't keep electing people who either give false promises or just aren't talking about it. And that's the thing. It has to be beyond just talking about things. It has to actually be pushing for a change in the kind of policy that is created and pushed forward. But that also means that it means that we need to help people within communities also change their minds and have that be a priority for them and that they want to elect someone like that. We need to allow people to get to a point where they can actually dream of a world where we do address climate change and what that means for everyone. Because I think sometimes people just don't even know what that is. It's something very kind of like, it's just very disconnected from so many people's everyday lives. So we need to, again, normalize that, have it be part of the conversation, have it be something that, is made real for everyone. We're lucky enough in the West to be able to protest and to be able to elect officials, within the realms of government that we have, but a lot of people in the world don't have access to that. So I think it's also finding ways to support each other, even if, you can't go out and protest or you can't go out and vote. We need to find ways that the world can support each other and change because, we are facing a global issue. But in terms of what you right now, consuming less is a start.
Yeah, that's one of the biggest ones. Also raising your voices and helping to educate people about the climate movement, because surprisingly enough, people still don't know that it's a real threat, and people still push global warming, climate change, climate disasters, and all of this away to a tiny corner of their brains. And it's really, really crazy how normal, fully functioning adults that we know who are lovely people and integrated into society can just, it just goes over their heads. So keep talking, bring people into the conversation, bring people in to your fold, organize little things in your own communities, as well as looking at bigger things like the UN plastic treaty and other things like that that's supposed to happen, and push your leaders for bigger change.
Yeah, and I'll share two things. I think the first one, everyone should be able to do this, is to take like 5 minutes today now to like journal and reflect on the like type of world that you want to live in, and like remove the constraints around you have to go to college, you have to work 40 hours a week, you like have to buy a white picket fence and a house. Like remove all of that and like really reflect on the type of world and society that you want to live in. And then once your heart starts expanding, because you get to really think creatively about that, find a space, find the people, find organizations, find movements that are like trying to do that. It's part of the reason why I'm in Sunrise. I like felt the vision of the Green New Deal, like a society where like communities and people were taken care of in addition to stopping the climate crisis. And so, yeah, I think like really dig deep and do the soul searching to figure out the type of society that you want to see, and then find a place, a community that's going to hold you accountable to get there. And then the second thing is like, if you love climate, if you like organizing, if you want to win a Green New Deal, you can join Sunrise. I think there's like a slide to share more, but those are like the two things that I would share for people. The world would be much better off if more people were not trying to profit and make money, but instead recreate and rebuild society into one that works for everyone.
Yeah, thank you everyone for sharing those amazing actions. And this has just been a wonderful discussion. So thank you to each of our incredible panelists, Abrar, Slater, and Dejah, for so generously giving your time, your wisdom, and your stories. This has been amazing. Thank you so much. Now I want to turn to the next slide, which summarizes some of the top actions submitted by our panelists and our action partners, some of which we already discussed, and perhaps some new ones as well. So, as you can see, we have things like being with nature and connecting with nature and researching how climate change affects your own community. Also, we can rehaul the way we live, the kind of lifestyle that we have, and the kind of things that we consume. We can get involved, like Dejah mentioned, with the Sunrise Movement. You can even join One Earth's virtual book discussion for the book All We Can Save, beginning the week of March 14th. And finally, we can use our voices to appeal to lawmakers, to the people in power, to enact political change, and to make our environment sustainable. Thank you so much, everyone. And these actions will be emailed to you, so don't worry. Now, as we close out, I hope you all felt called toward One Earth's 11-year theme of turning the tide. Please share in the chat ways you're ready to join in turning the tide on our climate crisis. What do you feel compelled to do as a result of this event? Yeah, just feel free to add in the Vimeo chat what actions you think you'll take to help turn the tide in our climate crisis. That's a good one, Jen, making sure we live our lives in a sustainable way. I'm sure that's something everyone here can do. And growing our own food. Slater already has some good knowledge on that. So. Supporting Sunrise's efforts. I'm sure Dejah will like that. But yeah, there's so many organizations, and Sunrise has so many local chapters, so feel free to join them and support their efforts. Alan, yes, I definitely agree. Continuing to work with all these environmental organizations that we've heard about and combat climate change and all of the other threats that we face. That's a good one, Timothy. Resisting the deniers. Yeah. That's a good one, Regina. Living small and eating vegan. That's a great one, Jen. Voting and getting out to vote. Like Dejah said, we don't just want social media and Twitter action, but we want political and strategic action. So voting is a big part of that. Okay, thank you everyone so much for sharing some of the actions you feel like you can take. So now we're coming to the end of our event, but to learn more about our panelists and stay in touch with their work, see the links on this slide, and remember to tweet, post, and share about what you experienced online and in social media. And everyone, if you can please fill out our post-event survey. We really want to improve these events to work best for young folks and young climate activists and other aspiring activists of all ages. And join us again for another event later today and during Earth Week in April. And last, a huge thanks to each and every one of you for being here and participating. I hope you have a great night, and thank you so much.